morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Moses. I'm not sure if you're ready to start, but maybe just to start by welcoming everyone to this webinar. We're really excited to have you on board. This webinar is titled Positioning Africa's Civil Society and Citizens on Climate Change, Energy Transition, and the Extractives in Readiness for the COP. My colleague Moses Kulaba will be speaking more on the initiative and what really we seek to achieve through this initiative. This webinar has been jointly organized by Tax Justice Network Africa, NRGI, Publish What You Pay, Econews, and Oxfam. And we are really honored to have you all here with us. Without wasting much time, I'll hand over to my colleague Moses to just give us a brief overview of this initiative, and then I'll get into introducing the main presenter. Moses Kulaba, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Mukupa, for the welcome remarks. Dear colleagues who are joining us from all over Africa and also other parts of the continent, as Mukupa has said, we are very delighted and very excited, and we are very thankful that you have spent some time to join us today as we kick off a very important initiative that perhaps will be able to shape our work, but also our positioning as a continent on matters climate change and energy transition. My name is Moses Kulaba, and I'm the East Africa Regional Manager for NRGI. NRGI in full is Natural Resources Governance Institute. I'm sure most of you have seen our work, but I want to say that this seminar is a joint work that we have been able to put together with 5 distinct organizations that are working on the continent: Oxfam, NRGI, Publish What You Pay, Econews, and Tax Justice Network. I want to say that most of you are aware that Africa is at crossroads. We seem to have a lot of aspirations, and yet we also know that the effects of climate change are affecting all of us. Nowhere can that be felt than in the extractive sector. There are so many questions and there's so many unanswered positions that we have been grappling with as a continent. In fact, as I speak right now, there is what's being called the North and the South divide because of some of the divergences of the issues that we are going to talk about today. We hope that the series that we're going to start this morning, which will be running all the way through up to COP27, will enable us to come to a consensus on a number of issues. These sessions are more of learning, but also more of sharing. And we're very pleased and very delighted to be joined by distinguished panelists who will be joining us to share with us most of the experiences, how they have navigated through this journey. As civil society, as government actors, as people members in the industry, as communities, we have grappled so much. And we hope that at some point, we should be able to discuss all these issues from a sober mind and be able to see how best can we anchor ourselves in this looming tragedy that seems to be affecting all of us. We wished, if we could, as a continent, to stay away from it. But unfortunately, climate change is global and it affects everybody. So depending on how we take on this initiative will determine our future, not only our own future, but also the future of our children, the future of our grandchildren, and those who will come afterwards. And I'm very, very, very distinguished, ladies and gentlemen, today, say that we are kicking off today with the first session. We shall be having another session tomorrow, which will be focusing on oil and gas, and many more sessions will be coming. Without wasting a lot of time, I want to say that we are very pleased this morning to be joined by Dr. Rose Mwebaza. Dr. Rose Mwebaza is the Director of Climate Change Technology Network at the UN. And she's going to share with us a few remarks before we invite Professor Godwell Namo, who will be introduced by our moderator today. And we look forward to having a very fruitful discussion. And please feel free to drop your charts, drop some questions. If you have some perspectives, please feel free to share with them. Before I conclude, let me appreciate my colleagues who have been able to put this together. I want in particular to recognize Mr. Silas Olang, who is the NRGI Africa Regional Director, who has also been part of us and helped us to shape through, and all the regional directors of the different organizations that have joined us today. With these few remarks, let me, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dr. Rose Mwebaza to say a few remarks before we hand over to Professor Godwell Namo. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Moses, and colleagues. Thank you for this warm welcome and the opportunity to talk to you about something that is really critically important, as Moses said. we have no choice but to engage, because really our future as Africa depends on how we respond to the climate challenge and the options that we have. Because of the nature of the position I hold, my comments and presentation will be general. But let me start by telling you a little bit about myself and what I do. I'm the director of the UN Climate Technology Center and Network, or the CTCN as it is commonly called. And this is the technology mechanism of the UNFCCC. And basically our mandate based on the UNFCCC is to support the transfer of environmentally sound technologies from developed to developing countries. And the Paris Agreement in Article 10 provides the technology framework within which we support the transfer of these environmentally sound technologies. We are a global entity headquartered in Copenhagen, where I'm sitting, but we have regional offices that cover Africa, where I have a team sitting in Nairobi, in Panama, where I have the team that covers Latin America, and in Bangkok, where I have a team that covers the Asia and the Pacific region. We are in over 100 countries. So a lot of what I also say is based on experience, because I think for Africa, part of what we have to do as we think about transition, we cannot talk in isolation. This is a global issue. What are the other countries doing? How are they doing it? And where within that context do we see ourselves as Africans? So a little bit of context. I really want to appreciate your colleagues in the civil society to say that this webinar on positioning Africa's civil society and citizens on climate change, the energy transition and extractives in readiness for the COP27 is very timely, and it comes at a critical time. It comes at a critical time, one, because COP27 is an African COP. And as you know, when we came out of Glasgow, the idea was not just for the COP to be physically on the continent, but for it to lay the path for Africa in terms of climate action. And I think civil society are going to be key actors in ensuring that the outcomes of COP27 really address Africa's imperative. So this is very critical. I think the other COP that I can remember that was this critical was the one in Durban. But you also know that the timeliness of your webinars is also linked to the latest IPCC reports. So this is the third installment. And what this report confirms what we all know, even though we could not express it in scientific terms, but it confirms what we've all known, that there is an exacerbation of the impacts of climate change globally. But in scientific terms, they've confirmed by telling us that total net anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions have continued to rise since 2010. And that in fact, the cumulative net CO2 emissions have been the highest since 1850. We have been told that the average greenhouse gas emissions during the period between 2010 and 2019 is higher than any time it has ever been in human history. As one journalist put it, the planet is frying, literally beneath our feet. And so what this latest report tells us is that unless we do something immediately and have deep greenhouse gas reductions across all sectors, we've really passed the threshold of the attainability of the 1.5 degrees, which is what was agreed upon globally and was the basis for agreement of the Paris Agreement. But I think what is absolutely significant about this report, it just doesn't give us a gloomy picture, or just doesn't paint a gloomy picture. It spells out 43 climate solutions along with their effectiveness and price tag, because we cannot address climate change without addressing the financial implications. And the silver lining, surprisingly, I think, because there's a tendency to think that this is an insurmountable problem, is that the cost of ending climate change is not as enormous as we think. And we'll look at why this is. Again, in terms of context, please remember that prior to this report, we had two reports that came out last year from the IPCC. And in many ways for Africa, these reports were very important. They highlighted the physical impact of climate change on countries and the rising number of extreme weather events globally. So for Africa, for example, they noted that Africa is experiencing higher heat and higher sea levels than the rest of the world. Most of you, regardless of where you come from Africa, you can attest to this. I personally come from Uganda, and I can tell you it's been extremely hot for a country that lies across the equator and benefits from the cooling effect of Lake Victoria. And we are told that in the next decade, Africa will experience more frequent and intense heat waves of up to 5 times more, yeah, as well as more rainfall, more frequent and more intense droughts, and more common and severe coastal flooding. To put it bluntly, we'll be living our worst nightmare when it comes to climate change. It looks like one of those movies they make of total destruction of the earth. And what really the 2 prior reports confirmed, you know, is that the need for success of adaptation is closely related to the level of mitigation we achieve. I say that because the current report that comes out focuses largely on mitigation, but you can't achieve mitigation without adaptation. And therefore it emphasized that the overall risk of the impact of climate change can only be reduced if we consider both adaptation and mitigation, and that if we don't tackle both of them contemporaneously, the IPCC tells us that GDP per person would be higher 5% by 2100 if we considered them together. But if we don't, then we are most definitely going to reach that 2 degrees centigrade. We are also told if we tackle both adaptation and mitigation contemporaneously, we could save up to $17.5 trillion per year. But if we don't, the cost of adaptation and creating resilience, generally, we could go up to $1.3 trillion. So the trade-offs, I think, are quite clear. What the numbers are telling us is that, 1, the impacts of climate change are severe, more frequent, and more dramatic. And that's why for Africa also, as well as for the other developing countries, especially the small island developing countries, one of the agendas now that is hot on the heels of COP27 coming out of Glasgow is loss and damage. That makes sense because we know from the science, but also from the reality of where we come from, of the more frequent and intense extreme weather events. Now, as I said, the silver lining is that we have been told that, in fact, we have the technology, we have the knowledge, and we have the resources financially to address climate change. So why isn't anything happening? I think that is what is truly baffling. And this is where I have to be careful in terms of the political implications of the conversations we have. But this is where really your leadership as the civil society will come in. You know, I think for those of you who are active in this conversation know the controversy that surrounded the agreement of the final report. So to talk about process, because process is always important to the outcome. As you know, the IPCC final report is negotiated among the close to 200, over 190 countries that are members. And one of the more interesting conversations that's happening in the back, please read the media reports. I am quoting media reports, is the intensity of conversations relating to how much science should be put out in relation to how much fossil fuels have impacted climate change and the transition to low energy. And in fact, while the detailed report itself has a lot of this science, you won't find that information in the policy brief for the policymakers, because as you know, we still have a conundrum between the fossil fuel companies and many of the countries that depend on these fossil fuels. The idea is, how do you create a balance in addressing climate change without pointing fingers? And now, and unfortunately, because of the uncertainty of the global community we live in, while they were preparing this report and simply arguing over the science of fossil fuel impacts on climate change, nobody had accounted for, in producing this report, for the current war in Ukraine and Russia. This has brought a completely different dimension. And while it has definitely highlighted the importance of accelerating the energy transition and moving away from the reliance of fossil fuels, especially when these fossil fuels are dominated by a small group of countries, it has also highlighted that because the transition period countries had given themselves under UNFCCC did not take into account the impacts of war, many countries, in fact, have to ramp up fossil fuel production before they can get back on the path to transitioning to low energy. So it's a very complex situation. But just to go back to the point that I was making on the silver lining, because I deal with technology in my portfolio, that's what I will talk about. So what the latest IPCC report really does, because it focuses on mitigation largely, it has a high input on technology. And it tells us that the good news is that the unit cost of several low emission technologies have fallen continuously since 2010. And in addition to that, innovation policy packages have also enabled these cost reductions and support globally to go down. So both tailored policies and comprehensive policies addressing innovation systems have really helped to overcome the distributional, environmental, and social impacts potentially associated with the global diffusion of low emission technologies. The challenge to that is that this is really happening, not evenly globally, because as you know, in many of the developing countries, innovation has lagged behind. And so we are not necessarily benefiting from all these innovations and technological advancements. And to just give you a sense of how much there has been advancement in technologies for low emissions that would allow us to transition to low carbon pathways, even in the energy sector. Look at what is happening in the renewable energy sector. We now know for a fact, and the IPCC has confirmed this, that there has been a sustained decrease in the unit cost of solar energy of 85%. Solar energy now is easily accessible at a reasonably cheap price, even for countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Wind energy, the price has gone down 55%. Storage of energy has been an issue. And so we also now know, because of advancement, innovation, and technologies, that lithium-ion battery production has gone down 85%. And because of this decrease in the cost of these renewable energies, there has been a large increase in their deployment, 10 times over for solar energy and 100 times more for electric vehicles. This is mostly really in developing countries. So for countries like Norway, I think they are anywhere between 70 and 80% deployment of electric vehicles. So the point I was making is that the mix between technological advancement, which has allowed, one, the unit cost of renewable energy to go down, two, that has allowed the easy deployment of these technologies, especially through digitization, and three, the policies in the countries that are enabling this deployment. There is a very real silver lining in addressing climate change. However, it's important to note that we have to look beyond technologies, but also look at financing. And again, for Africa, we cannot talk about transitioning to low energy pathways without addressing the age-old problem of the proverbial $100 billion, which we now know is also still a gross underestimation. Regardless, we cannot have this conversation without talking about financing, but also a just transition. So as we've said, globally, cumulatively, there's sufficient global capital.
Sorry, Dr. Rose.
Yes.
Sorry, Dr. Rose, just to give you 3 more minutes.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'll be done. So as I was saying, that there's sufficient global capital and liquidity to close the gap. But where is this financing? A lot of it is not getting to Africa. And in order to properly discuss this Africa energy transition, I'll give you just a context. Consider these numbers, that globally, 1.3 billion people are without electricity. 2.6 billion people in developing countries still use traditional biomass for cooking. And in Africa, it should not come as a surprise to all of you that 759 million people are without electricity. which means they still lack access to clean energy. And therefore, the switch from fossil fuels and traditional biomass is going to be a complicated one. However, for Africa, therefore, we cannot talk about transitioning without also talking about sustainable energy and access to energy. And that's where the discussion of whether Africa should keep its fossil fuels in the ground is a very contentious one. Also because it is linked to Africa's emissions, which are anywhere between 3 and 4% globally, but definitely under 4. So sustainable finance, sustainable energy and technologies and innovation are critical. And we must also understand that within the UN, you asked me to talk about the UN system. The UN proposed a roadmap to 2030 as part of the Sustainable Development Goals of around 35 billion a year to bring access to electricity to the 759 million people who currently lack power in sub-Saharan Africa. But in fact, we know that $25 billion a year only can raise all the entire 2.6 billion people who don't have access to energy. And yet we can't seem to lay our hands on that money. So Africa should move from speaking generically about the transition one to zeroing in on the particular technologies that allow that transition, zeroing in on where that money is and how that money can be moved to the continent, because we know that money is around. And for Africa, I think Professor will talk about this. We know our potential is limitless for renewable energy. Even with the most modest estimations, Africa's renewable energy potential for photovoltaic energy, for example, could lead to electric production of around 660,000 terawatts per hour. It's an enormous amount of energy. And this is especially mainly in Eastern and Southern Africa, but we know for the Sahel region, that is also important. And lastly, to just focus on one technology, not to talk about it generically, that could completely transform Africa. Consider the impact of digital technologies on energy transfer. If you look at digital technologies and their potential to play a transformational role in unlocking global climate action and enabling transitioning to low carbon energy pathways, and really to help Africa leapfrog from the dark continent that we are literally to lighting up Africa. This is the word we used to use when I used to work for the African Development Bank. Digital technologies, especially ICT, we know are transformational. If you see what they've done for the financial sector through the fintech technologies, we know that they can achieve a similar outcome for Africa. So to conclude by saying that from an operational point of view, for example, digital sensors can allow us to generate a significant amount of data to provide real-time information regarding the key functional parameters of power plants and status of networks without setting up those long infrastructure poles and cables that we are traditionally used to. And for countries like Kenya, for example, or Ethiopia or Ghana, this can be done on scale immediately and at minimal cost. So colleagues, as I conclude for the organizers of this, I want to say thank you for the opportunity, but this is a very complex issue. Linking climate change to energy transition, you cannot do that without talking about technology and innovation or financing and how Africa can get its hands on that, but also how we can reconcile the fact that how can we have a just transition that enables access to energy? We need energy for industrialization, for infrastructure, for urbanization. So it's a very complex mix, and I hope the webinar will present an interesting opportunity to disentangle this complex conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roswell. Thank you so much, Dr. Roswell, for giving us those important remarks. And you've highlighted some very important facts and issues on the issue of climate change and energy and then transition in Africa. And it really confirms the importance and agency of this matter. I like the important point you make that we as a continent cannot talk about transitioning without talking about sustainable energy, finance, and technology. And so we really hope that this series we are starting today goes into detail in unpacking some of these pertinent issues and seeing how as a continent we can find solutions to addressing these challenges that we face ahead of us. Thank you again, and we look forward to engaging you in the upcoming sessions. I now have the honor and privilege of introducing Professor Godwell Namo, who's the main speaker for this session. Godwell Namo is a full professor, chief researcher, and Exaro chair in climate and sustainable transitions at the University of South Africa. He is a National Research Foundation C-rated researcher undertaking research in the fields of COVID-19, climate change and governance, climate change and tourism, green economy, and sustainable development. Professor Namo has conceptualized and successfully completed 17 book projects. He has published 101 journal articles, and since 2013, graduated 11 PhDs and hosted 11 postdoctoral fellows. Professor Namo was also one of the 4-member African Union high-level panel drafting the Green Innovation Framework for the continent. Professor Namo is one of the experts for the Non-Economic Losses Group under the UNFCCC, Warsaw International Mechanisms on Loss and Damage. Professor Namo, it's a real privilege and honor to have you for this session. And without wasting much time, I will hand over to you to make your presentation. Welcome, Professor Namo. Over to you.
Thank you. Can somebody confirm if I'm being heard?
Yes, we can hear you, Professor Namo.
Okay, and I also maybe think by default you can see me.
Yes, we can see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ross, for your talk. I really enjoyed it, and you've made my life easy because some of the things that we have covered, now I don't need to cover them anymore. They are already done in that particular space. So I will possibly may just go into my presentation as I was requested to do that. You will discover that I've tried to peg this presentation as a generic presentation. I won't be getting much into what Dr. Rose have already discussed around adaptation resilience matters, which is actually one of the major issues that we address in climate change. I'll talk today on climate change and energy transitions. What are they and what are the issues? You can add there for Africa. It's also in your interest. My presentation is going to be like this, and I've learned over years that I don't need to complete my presentations, and not at all. So when time is up, program director, let me know. I will just stop there. It means that will be what we are supposed to be learning for the day. Introduction and background, climate change, issues in this generation, energy transition, what is it and for whom? Conclusion, being climate compatible and energy transitions ready in Africa. So as part of my introduction, I know some of you are on these social media platforms. I am not there. You are free to tweet or to social media this talk. Now, 3 pointers. Usually when I'm talking to large crowds, I want to then leave them with something of interest, which I call, these are pillars for success. And you can actually consider this as pillars for success for Africa and also for you as an individual. So I'm saying as a continent, we need to have a vision and we must be on a mission. And where there's no vision to address issues around energy transitions, what is going to happen? We will perish and somebody has to supervise us. And we're saying we don't only need to talk about this vision to energy transition, climate change, but we should actually translate this into tangible perspectives that are objective, targets, and action points. And of course, life is going to smile at us one day. We need to stand up and be counted because the world is full of people in the crowds. So for us to be counted as a continent, we need hybrid individuals. And I'm talking about you and me, individuals that or persons that can perform in more than one area of specialization. So it's not good enough for you to say, I'm in a civil society, I'm dealing with climate mitigation, I'm civil society, I'm dealing with technology, I'm in civil society, I'm doing with IT or dealing with COVID. That is not good enough. The world now demands people that know more, that know a lot. So I call these hybrid individuals, and as such, you can stand up and be founded. We need to plan to leave a legacy for our continent, and we need to think intergenerational. And I ask myself or yourself, what shall you be remembered for? We need to leave a print of good deeds, and we need to take ourselves. What do we need to take when you go to your gravesite at some imaginary point? We are saying, what are people going to say about you? Are they going to say, you know what, there lies a thief who actually almost made the entire continent broke? So these are the issues that when we're going to negotiations, we need to do that. I want to add that in negotiations, there's no need for bravery. And also, when you negotiate, you get what you negotiate for. So as you go for COP27, we need to be very clear as civil society that we are going to get what we negotiate for. So if you are not going to negotiate for our interest as a continent, that is what we are going to get. If you are going to negotiate for interest of our former masters, that is what we are going to get. So it's important that in as much as our continent looks very nice on the paper, we need to realize the tensions, the divisions, the invisible and the thick invisible and the lines that you can feel as an individual in terms of our divisions. We are not as united as we are on paper. And this is something that has always worried me, and we need definitely to do something about it as a continent. Now, the other issue that I want to raise are the 5 pointers I need you to take home. The harsh realities of climate change and energy transitions have both direct and indirect impacts on our livelihoods as Africa and Africans, and now and into the future. Climate change, number 2, also has inseparable links to the attainment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 intertwined SDGs. From the SDGs, the following directly speak to climate change and energy transition: SDG 7, SDG 9, and SDG 13. But all other SDGs are also linked indirectly to the issue of climate change and energy transition. Number 4, to address complex global challenges in the context of climate change, energy transitions, SDGs, I've added the disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction and management. Civil society must ask difficult questions and find simple solutions. So as we are going to go to COP17, we need to ask difficult questions, but we should not find difficult answers. Finding difficult answers is not going to help us. We need to ask difficult questions and find simple solutions. We need quick and big wins. And another issue that I'm going to be talking about now is number 5, is the issue of climate change and energy transitions are here to stay. And we must learn to live with them, especially the net zero emissions by the year 2050. So the direction has been set, the global direction of development has been set, and that global direction of development has to be within the context of low carbon transition and net zero emissions by 2050. So we're saying that as we go to COP27, what is the best scenario we can bring out for the African continent? And if we can have that in mind, then we'd have done what we should be doing as Africans. I think in terms of what I want to present today, we are done. So these are the major pointers that I then try to expand in the talk. I see there's an issue there. Okay. Now, we are going to move to the next section that's going to talk to us about climate change issues from the IPCC and the UNFCCC. So IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I don't want to assume everybody has been in this space. The UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. These are terminologies that we cannot avoid if we are going to talk about climate change. Now, the other interesting part there, are some of the issues that were highlighted by Rose, but I've just put it pictorially so that we can see. I wrote the climate change and energy transitions, headlines in town. You know, when there are headlines in town, they are headlines in town. So one of the major headline in town is the IPCC report, Climate Change 22, Mitigation of Climate Change, that was published on Monday. That is a headline in town. The other headlines in town that have started last year is COP26 where the issue of net zero by 2050 came up strongly, ease of financing came up strongly. The 100 billion that remains in the air will always be here for us to stay. Then there are also headlines in town that started in 2015, leave no one behind, the SDGs. I highlighted the energy SDG and the climate SDG. The other headline in town is the hypersonic missiles. So somebody might ask, what is the hypersonic missiles to do with the energy transition? Thank you, Rose, because if she's still on the webinar, she has put it clearly to say the war in Ukraine is drastically, actually, it is a game changer. So the issue now of energy transitions has been put on fast tracking or on high speed. We hear of the US now saying we need to cut. We're actually cutting relations in terms of the energy space with Russia. EU in general, Canada, we are going to pump so much barrels of per day to top up what is being lost from Russia. So apart from the fact that there is a quick or immediate solution to still continue on hydrocarbons, the reality is we now have to see the scaling up of renewable energies, especially other energies in the electric vehicle space and green hydrogen, all that kind of stuff. So the stage is set for the world to move with speed towards energy transitions. And you are saying, we are not part of Russia, we are not part of Ukraine, we are not part of EU, but we have trade links, we are a global village. So we cannot then stand and be there aloof and possibly, I'm not a politician, so I can condemn the killing of lives by whoever, whether it's Russia or it's Ukraine. That is not wrong, that is not right. I can also condemn the bombing of the energy infrastructure, whether it's Ukraine or it's Russia. So really we are saying that there are issues that as humanity we should get worried about. And those are some of the issues. When you talk about climate change for the novice, we usually use two definitions, but when you're talking mainly about the negotiation, so there are issues here that are interesting. When I talk about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and there are issues around climate change, what do? We speak about climate change refers to any change in climate over time, whether due to natural variability or as a result of human activities. Then the UNFCCC actually broadens that definition. It says climate change refers to a change of climate that is attributed directly or indirectly to human activities that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and that is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time or period. So the addition there at the end is from the IPCC. Then the UNFCCC is emphasizing a lot on human-induced climate change, and which is resulting from the greenhouse gas. I'm going to skip to explain how the greenhouse effect works. You can read in your literature, but basically, to sum it up, there is a lot of harmful greenhouse gases that are being pumped into the atmosphere, and when this happens, they trap the heat, and that heat leads to global warming, and the global warming then results in climate change. Then what we see coming are I call them tantrums. They are the effects or the results of the changing climate. Extreme droughts, like right now in East Africa, extreme floods, tornadoes, increasing tropical cyclones, increasing heat waves, increasing cold, maybe even the locust. All these now are the results of the changing climate. These are some of the major greenhouse gases that we talk about, harmful gases that result in global warming and climate change that we talk about, carbon dioxide, which is the common one, methane, nitrogen oxides, sulfur, all those are some of the things that we talk about. Where are they coming from? They are coming from agriculture, when you clear the forest, deforestation, when you clear the forest. In agriculture, application of fertilizer, manure, waste and wastewater, industry, in manufacturing, energy, which is the bulk, especially fossil fuels, coal, and other hydrocarbons, crude oil or gas, diesel use, they come in that, then transportation. So all these are where the major sources of greenhouse gases are coming from. So when we talk about climate change, there are two major arms that we look at: adaptation and resilience. and mitigation. So adaptation and resilience are saying we need to learn to live with climate change. Mitigation, we must reduce the harmful greenhouse gases we are emitting into the atmosphere. Then the other issue about financing, research and development, technology, innovation, and I've added the IPR, intellectual property rights. There is a glitch there in terms of intellectual property rights. Why I'm talking about that is a lot of energy transitions technology. We are talking about the solar panel. I don't know of any African country that is manufacturing solar panels. If maybe it is happening now, it has just happened in the last 3 or 2 years. So that really is a problem. We are a consumer continent. And with the amount of energy we have, solar and solar radiation we have, surely we cannot be not having one manufacturing plant for solar panels. That really is criminal in terms of us. We are not doing ourselves a favor. And those are some of the challenges that then when we go to negotiations in COP27, we need to place these things on the table and we need to be clear about it. There is no being apologetic about it. We have the solar. It is our solar in this side, and we should ride on it. And when we negotiate, that is our strongest position. So we cannot therefore be cornered into a situation where we perpetually are importers of solar panels, whether they are first generation, second generation, third generation, or nth generation. So we are saying here, as we go to COP27, and as we walk in the walk of life within climate change and net zero by 2050, these are fundamental issues that we need to address. And also we need to develop our own capacity. We need champions that can actually present these issues when we go there. For those that were still in the doldrums about whether climate change is happening or not, this is a storyline that we put to rest in 2007 through one of the IPCC's reports. It's ERA 4 report. The ERA 4 report gave the signs that graph number 1A, which is on top, that is graph the one on graph A, global average surface temperatures, there was evidence that it was rising. Since 1850 to about 2000, that evidence was unequivocal. I will now talk to graph number C, Northern Hemisphere snow cover. If, for example, global surface temperatures are rising, there should be something that happens in the northern hemisphere. The snow cover must reduce. That has been happening. You can see the decline. So if the snow cover is reducing, there's water. Where is it going? The water must go somewhere. So when you go to graph number B, you see the global sea level rising. So if I were then in that group, I would have switched these graphs like I am explaining now. Sea level global average temperature rise resulting in melt, and that water then going to the sea. So I'd switch graph B and C there. Now, there is something that I've spoken there around the Kyoto mechanism. I might not have time to do about this, but this is this whole system brought a market-based carbon trading system or emissions reduction system. I will not enter into the controversies as how the Kyoto mechanism replaced the Brazil's Clean Development Mechanism. So the Brazil Clean Development Fund basically was saying the polluters must pay. They were drawing from the polluter pays principle. So the countries that were polluting should have paid the countries that were not polluting and set up, or should have been penalized, set up a clean development mechanism fund, and that fund could clean the environment. But it did not see the light of the day. As we know, it was a weaker nation. Now, when I talk about climate change and energy transition issues, we cannot run away from issues of equity. So for those that have read this novel, like I did, you discover that in the animal farm, some other animals are bigger, some other animals are greater. So you discover there's been a controversy now which Europe is trying to be clever about. We had a crisis about refugees from Libya and all that kind of stuff. And we know part of the cause there was the Americans were involved. Now, what happened there? We discovered that these refugees were not allowed into Europe. And now we've got a similar situation with Ukraine, and there are all sorts of explanations to try and sugarcoat it, to say, no, it's not a similar situation. There is no life that is more equal. But of course, the animal farm tells us that there are other animals that are more equal. So I'm not a UN person. So I speak truth to power. So as we are going to be moving towards energy transitions, as we are going to go to COP27, you should understand that there are other animals that are bigger than us. There are other animals that are bigger than the Africans. But we know an elephant was killed by an ant. So we want to do a Goliath and a David story here as we move in the energy transitions. Why? Because there are a lot that is there. I might forget in this talk to talk about the so-called green metals. So the green metals are now firing the global development towards 2050, net zero by 2050. And where are these green metals coming from? Copper, zinc, palladium, you name them. They are all coming from the continent, and we don't have that equal power. So we are seeing power plays now. The Chinese are coming, the Indians are coming, the Americans are coming, EU is coming, everybody is coming, the Canadians are coming. We've got companies already that are not originating from the continent. We have got a situation where the uranium is mined in West Africa, and there is not even a single uranium plant. There's not even a single what you call it, nuclear plant, a nuclear energy plant in West Africa. That is chaotic. We cannot have a situation where we're going to go to COP, lift our flags high. We must hang our heads in shame if we go to COP27, and we are not going to raise these issues. So the fact that the African continent is going to propel global growth and at the expense of ourselves, that should be history. We are in a situation where we need to stand up and be counted. We need to question. We need to start asking difficult questions. Why is there no nuclear plant in West Africa? Yet there are nuclear plants being financed by West Africa in Paris or in France. Those issues need to be raised. Why is there no nuclear plant in DRC? When we have got such issues, why is it that some of the offshore oil in Africa does not see the light of the day on the African continent? These are difficult questions that we need to ask and find simple solutions. So the simple solutions here is the time is over where the African continent is going to be bullied into climate change and energy transitions as if we don't have anything. We are not second-class citizens. We should not be second-class citizens. We are not children out of a wedlock. We are citizens of the globe, and we have resources that we should propel our energy transitions from. Now, who is polluting? That is your map for you. You can see who has been polluting the most. I don't have time. From the Paris Agreement, we have got our global goal to build resilience. We've got also our global goal to go to net zero, and now we know it's net zero by 2050. Now, these are some of the issues that are on COP26 on the agenda. Since we are coming from there, I'll just quickly run through them for a recap. So from COP26, we were expecting this to happen: secure global net zero by mid-century and keep 1.5 degrees within reach, adopt to protect communities and natural habitats, mobilize finance, and work together to deliver. I don't have time to go through these slides. Remember, I said, I think the organizers can circulate them later on. Now, there are major issues that have come out of the ERA 6. I'm now focusing on the ERA 6, the mitigation ones. I'll just give you a rundown of what has happened. I think Rose also touched on some of these issues. Number one, 2020, 2009 to 2019, average annual greenhouse gas emissions at highest level in human history. We are not on track to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, although there is increased evidence of climate action. Unless there are immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, 1.5 degrees is beyond our reach. In some cases, costs for renewables have fallen below those of fossil fuels. That is a big tick. Electricity systems in some countries and regions are already predominantly powered by renewables. This is an interesting take. I think some regions might definitely exclude Africa. Maybe I can talk of maybe South Africa and Kenya, as far as I know. Those that could be running on the forefront. The rest, we are just there. or we are not there. So I'm saying that if that statement saying in some regions, is your region, is your country part of this movement? If no, it means something should be done, and that something should be done yesterday. Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees requires global greenhouse gas emissions peak before 2025, and 2025 in South Africa, we say Bazwaluwami. It's a Zulu term. It's not far. 2025, friends, it's not far. Then should reduce by 43% by 2030. 2030 as well is not far. Methane reduced by 34% by 2030. 2030 again is not far. So the question that's going to come there as we go to COP27, we are saying, as an African continent, what measures do we need to put in place if we're going to be part of this global movement? We don't want to fall over the cliff. We don't want to wake up 2030 and discover everybody has moved. We are still crybabies of the 18th century. We are no longer crybabies of the 18th century. We are part of the global citizenry and the global movement. Limiting warming to around 2 degrees requires global greenhouse gas emissions to peak before 2025, reduced by 27% by 2030. The temperature will stabilize when we reach the net zero carbon emissions, which is by 2050, of course. There are options available now in every sector, and that can be at least half emissions by 2030. These are some of the options. I've just said to pick energy. There are many other sectors that are there in the IPCC report. You can pick and read them yourself. In terms of the energy focus, major transitions are required to limit global warming. We need to reduce reduction in fossil fuel use and use of carbon capture and storage as a technology. We need low or non-carbon energy systems. Widespread electrification and improved energy efficiency is required, especially in the industries. Alternative fuels, for example, hydrogen and sustainable biofuels, is needed. Reducing demand and low carbon technologies are key to reducing emissions. Electric vehicle is a great potential. And I think for some of you, I know if you're driving to your office this morning, I'm working from home now, you discover that what you are driving on is going to be, we are going to raise our chickens in your Mercedes-Benz C-Class, E-Class, because by 2030, we won't be using combustion engines. I've written a paper in 2014. You can check it online, The Death of the Combustion Engine and Green Growth. You can retrieve it and read. I've written it many years back when I was talking about the futuristic of what was happening. And I predicted that the combustion engine was going to die. It was going to be history because humanity has got an inherent capacity to do that. My argument was saying, since we could do away with steam engine, moving to the combustion engine, we can surely do away with the combustion engine, moving to the electric vehicles. And I cannot vouch to say we are not going to do away with the electric vehicles because there could be something else in the future. I don't know. Sorry. Battery technology advances could assist electrical rail and trucks, aviation and shipping, alternative fuels, low emission hydrogen and biofuels needed. Overall, substantial potential, but depends on decarbonization of the power sector. Now, energy transition, what is it and for whom? Now, you know, Rose also did a very good job. That's why it's an advantage to speak after a good speaker. So Rose spoke about the just and sustainability transitions. Currently, my team is working on 4 book series on the just and sustainability transitions. So we can't talk energy transitions, climate change transitions without the just and sustainability transitions. So there are a number of roles that stakeholders can do. For example, just and sustainability transition requires stakeholders, including you listening to me now, to work together to determine the future of communities and individuals, especially as low carbon transition unfolds in Africa. Workers and employers are the core social partners mandated to make decisions that result in sustainability of current action or decisions. Unions, union federations and workers, organizations representative workers, and their interests at different levels must be presented. Business must represent themselves in workplace negotiations and are represented by employer organizations in regional, sectoral, national, or multilateral social dialogue like COP 2017. Now, there are partners there. For example, what should enterprises do? There is a need to agree on concrete, time-bound, and enterprise-wide plans for emissions cut while creating decent jobs, reskilling, and retaining workers, ensuring a social flow for workers who are retrenched and investing in communities. Now, this is a dicey issue. We in Africa, we are a coal continent. What are we going to do with the stranded assets of coal? What are we going to do with the stranded assets for OPEC? We have got new oil fields being discovered in Uganda and many other places on the continent, Namibia, possibly South Africa later. What are we going to do with these assets that are already getting into the to the register for retiring them? This is an issue that we are going to be meeting in COP 2027. For sectors, there is a need to promote strong climate, labor, and just transition targets, policies and supportive lobbying positions like in COP 27, and to invest in competitive sectoral collaboration on development, commercialization and dissemination of green technology and knowledge. And lastly, at the regional and national level, there is a need to play an active role in the formulation and implementation of strong climate, just transition, labor market, and social protection policies, and the public investment in green and decent jobs, training and education, sustainable infrastructure, and community renewal to back them up. Now, you discovered there are a number of slides that I've slated in this talk around some of the priority actions. For example, we're talking about net zero by 2050. It hinges on unprecedented clean technology push to 2030. So we can make the 2020 the decade of offensive clean energy expansion. That can be done. So the race net zero basically is a race around time, not a competition. So when we're talking about race to net zero, we need then to be sure that we should actually have science-based solutions. And that is going to give us a lot of mileage as a continent. I know the issue of science is a challenge for some of us here on the continent. I'm skipping some of the slides you are seeing there because of time, so that you can read on your own. So some of the priorities there when we're talking about making net zero emissions a reality, we are saying we need to take international cooperation to new heights, and also we should be tackling global challenges through coordinated actions. Now, these 2 points are important. So the issue of collaboration, or at times you can collaborate in order for you to compete. Now, when I say collaborate in order for us to compete is, what is stopping us or the Climate Technology Center for Africa in pooling resources of the continent, like I'm saying, to inaugurate this solar or wind manufacturing plant, wind technology manufacturing plant, whether we see it in South Africa, we see it in Ethiopia or DRC, this is none of my business, or Rwanda. So as a continent, we are saying there are times we need to collaborate in order for us to compete. So we have discovered, because of our colonial history, collaboration really is on paper. When it comes to the practice, when the French bring some few rands there, the British bring their few pounds, then we are disintegrated. Our politicians are disintegrated. Our civil society organizations are disintegrated. Because I know after this webinar, we are going to go back to your offices and start writing proposals to compete for the money. This question on climate change and energy transition, it goes beyond what I call small change for civil society. This is not a small change time. It's time for us to move forward with what is right for the continent. Like I'm saying, we will start writing proposals for small change, and that confuses the continent. When you go to COP 2017, because you've been financed by some other entity to go there, you get your per diem, especially after COVID, you're going to forget everything about what you're talking here. That is not what I'm advocating for. I'm saying you'd rather not go to COP 27 if you're going to be in that category, because we don't need you. We are not going to be talking about sellouts on the continent for this time. We are even having challenges about asking the right size of our continent. And that actually has got a bearing on net zero transition. If our continent, or what it should be now, bigger than what it has been shown all along in our geography textbooks, then it means it's time for us to talk about the reality of what is happening. So we need science to prove those things and move towards net zero. So some of the issues, one of the lead document from last year, which I should also have included as a highlight, is the International Energy Agency publication that was talking about net zero transitions, and it's talking about the low carbon journey to 2020 to 2050. I am just going to run through this quickly so that you see what is happening. So in 2020, we are looking at a situation where we can capture 40 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. But I think what will be interesting for us, you'll see how it changes in terms of the total emissions that is. So we are in 2020 want to register about 3.9 gigatons. In 2030, 20.1 gigatons of carbon emissions. 2035, 12.8 gigatons of carbon emissions. 2040, 6.3 gigatons of carbon emissions. And when we come to 2050, we want to have zero emissions. Now, what is that going to, I'm going to sit here a bit. What is going to happen then in 2050, where we've got zero emissions, net zero emissions? It means renewable research, almost renewable energy research, almost 90%, takes up almost 90% of total electricity generation. So we're looking at a situation where about almost 100% of our energy is going to be from renewables. We are looking at more than 85% of our buildings, which are zero carbon, zero carbon ready. Now, the other challenge that we face as a continent is this rush through what we call RED and RED Plus projects. Now, the RED and RED Plus projects are literally saying Africa must then let its trees stand. I don't have any problems with that. We can preserve this forest, but the old age question is, at what cost? We can't have a situation where somebody then from somewhere in DC, Washington DC, or somewhere in London tells us, I'm giving you this much for you to make the trees stand and do the trees what they do best, which is photosynthesis. So we agree, we are together to say the trees must stand, but at what cost to the African continent? We have got the entire equatorial region being mortgaged, the forest being mortgaged for carbon emissions and trading, and then at times we can't even touch the forest. So I'm saying there, the RED Plus, from RED to RED Plus, it was a good move, but I'm saying we need to move beyond RED Plus. We need to take care. We don't need anybody to tell us to say leave the trees standing and I give you an incentive. That is the wrong turn from whatever time the RED came into being. I think somewhere there in 2013, 2014 or earlier. So I think the good turn for us in terms of how to sequestrate carbon, how to take off carbon from the atmosphere through the forest and maybe even soil carbon, is we need to stand up as a continent to say, time has come for us to be responsible citizens. We don't need anybody telling us what to do. We should do it ourselves to say, this is what we are going to do with the mountains. This is what we are going to do with all these things. We cannot have a situation where one country comes and it takes the entire mountain from where it starts to the end, finding copper, finding cobalt, finding zinc. And when our children come to us 50 years from now and say, I see on the African map, there was Kilimanjaro. And you say, where did the mountain go? It was taken. It was taken by who? By the Chinese or by the Americans or by the British or by the Indians or by the Brazilians. No, we can't have such a situation. We need a situation where I'm talking about energy transitions. It should be a beneficial energy transitions. So I'm saying here, as we go to COP27 as civil society, the idea of green metals need to be on the table because it is the one that is driving the energy transition. If we miss this point and see the energy transition as moving away from fossil fuels, we are doomed. So we are saying we need to have the bigger picture as we go to COP2017. We need to map what are the pressure points for us. What do we have in our hands as a continent? I've already mentioned the issue of green metals. I'm going to mention the issue of coal. So I'm saying we are not going to dump coal overnight. That is not just. So we are going to dump coal, but we need to do it on a soft landing. So I want to go to COP27 and start shouting and say, pansy with coal. Pansy is a word that's said down in terms of one of the South African languages. This is where I'm based now. So we are not going to go there and say down with coal. No, that is not what we're going to do. We are going to go there and push the COP26 agenda, which says we are going to have a drawdown. So how do we draw down from coal? That is the major question that we need to ask. I'm concluding now, our program director. Now, the energy transition, the battle is going to be in the energy sector. So when I talk about sustainable energy transition, climate change fighting, the battle is there. It's lodged in the energy sector. So I'm saying the global energy landscape is undergoing a major transformation. Actually, it's going a radical transformation. So if the energy sector is undergoing a radical transformation, I'm saying, what is our role as Africans? However, the energy sector is still currently dominated by fossil fuels. That is true. So transition to low carbon fuels will generate a myriad of stranded assets, skills, and technology. So we're not only going to talk about what are we going to do about the coal mines that are going to be left? What about the equipment that is there? What about the insurance sector that is insuring this? What about the banking sector that is financing this? What about the human resources? Now, these are the stranded assets we need to present during COP27 and say, how are we going to deal with this? I've already provided some of the solutions earlier. There is a race towards innovations, skills and technology modifications to ensure relevance in the event of total transformation of the energy sector. So I'm saying, we are not going to go in a hunger strike over energy transition. We are not going to go on some form of a strike. We are going to go on a negotiated settlement. So a negotiated settlement is, right, we are at different pathways. We do this on differentiated responsibilities and capabilities. So as a continent, we know we've been disadvantaged in terms of technology, the brains we have, and they've been drained. But what is it on the table? We have these resources. It may not be core, but we've got other resources that we might need to do. And how then do we negotiate a settlement that is a win-win-win? It's not a win-win. I've put 3 wins there. Win-win-win solution. That is what we need to do. A lot is so far changed in the energy sector on the continent, but the continent is still lagging behind in terms of harnessing renewable energy technologies and providing access to energy for its population. So the energy sector, what we are witnessing the transition in our eyes or in our lifetime. Saudi Arabia, in bold plan to rule the 700 billion hydrogen market, country building a 5 billion plant, and maybe it's already taking place. UK hosting 10 projects to heat buildings with the gas. I think maybe it's this time not from Russia. China is deploying fuel cells, buses, and commercial vehicles. And in Japan is planning to use the gas in steel making. So we see the world is changing. That's what is happening there. Companies like Total, changing logos, changing focus from Total to Total Energies. These things are happening. Sasol here in South Africa is also changing its mandate. There are many, these are the headlines that you can look on your own time. So what is it for Africa? Africa is arguably the largest renewable energy resource of any continent, and sunlight is abundantly available everywhere. Other types of resources are more plentiful in some countries and regions that in others, such as geothermal in the Rift Valley, wind power in the Horn of Africa, and other various coastal areas. Africa's theoretical potential to generate onshore renewable energy from existing technologies is more than 1,000 times larger than its projected 2040 demand for electricity. So what are we waiting for? This means that we have more than enough renewable energy resources to serve. We can even have the desert tech supplying energy to Europe if we can develop this. With the right investments and enabling framework, it could even emerge as a next exporter of renewable energy. So here's the condition for countries that want to invest in Africa. We are going to give the condition that the direction for Africa is now we need to invest in renewable energy. So if our partnership should be energy friendly, it has to be energy investment. So when we are now going to start negotiating about maybe our partnership agreements, we don't know, we should not worry much about who throws tantrums at times when we put our foot down. It's time for us to put our foot down, and when you put your foot down, you're going to suffer. And we should be prepared to suffer. In some form or the other, conditions are going to come. We are going to cut this aid, we are going to cut that aid, you are going to cut this aid, you are going to cut that aid. But it's good, it's okay. It's okay for some aid to be cut for us in order for us to propel our agenda. I have put that already, called drawdown from Glasgow. We know in East Africa, there is the East African crude oil pipeline. Now, this is the interesting part. There is a pipeline, and I see the pipeline. Now, this is a challenge for you guys in East Africa. I know a lot of you are in East Africa in this webinar. I see the pipeline is coming from Uganda, and it's going to Tanga to Tanzania, which is interesting. Nothing wrong about that. So, if this pipeline is going to Tanzania, and the pipeline, I don't see the pipeline crisscrossing the continent in a manner that I want. So I am saying there, the colonial mentality of taking things ashore is still predominant in this map. And we are saying, we here in South Africa, Zimbabwe, wherever, we are battling, we don't have fuel, we don't have crude oil here. If we thought about that as we talk about energy transition, because we still need cheaper crude oil on the continent. We've got oil from Angola. I don't know where it's going. We've got oil from that's going to come from Namibia. Now oil from Uganda. And where is the pipeline going? It's going to Tanga. And I assume maybe it's also going to have branches going to other East African countries that now include the DRC. By the way, talking about DRC and Tanzania, I'm from SADC. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, now based in South Africa. And we have got challenges about these spaghetti issues on regional economic blocks. And I can assure you, the challenges are growing. So Tanzania and DRC must decide, do you want to go to East Africa or do you want to go to SADC? These are now difficult questions that require simple answers. Why I am raising this? We have got all these spaghetti issues that give us confusion when we want to start negotiating as blocks. So when you negotiate Tanzania and DRC, where are you going to be? Now, this is a difficult question that I'm leaving on this platform, which has got implications on energy transitions. So this I've just highlighting one of the challenges that we face about countries belonging to more than one regional economic trade bloc. It might have its advantages, but it might also have its own disadvantages. So we are not going to say stop the East African crude oil pipeline, but I'm saying as we talk energy transitions, we need to know now, we need to time it. Remember, we're talking about peaking 2025, plateauing 2030, net zero by 2050. So I'm saying, again, I will not say stop the project. What I'm going to say is like, we need a negotiated settlement about this project. We need to harvest the investment from this project. So as we are going to do the drawdown, not only from coal and the drawdown from crude oil, then this can be a platform for East Africa for us to have a soft landing. Because I've spoken about that. We are talking about solar roof panels here in South Africa. It's a lot. Now, we need our countries to be energy transition led, especially renewable energy transition led.
Sorry, Prof. Just giving you 5 minutes so that we can allow for people to engage with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm coming to the end as well. Thank you. So what I'm saying there is we need a situation where every country on the continent must have its red maps for investors. So if we're coming to South Africa, there's a solar potential map already done. You know, in the Northern Cape, that's where we have got, that's where it is fiercest. If you're a Christian, you know that David sent Uriah to where it was hottest in the battle. But in this case, we're talking about where it is hottest in terms of the modern day language, say it's hot. So here, where you want to invest in solar in South Africa is in the Northern Cape province, and that province is so big. So the solar map is ready, or solar atlas is ready. Where you want to invest in wind, the wind atlas is ready. So I'm saying the question you should ask is, like, my country, does it have this map? If it does not have this map, you are not ready. Because the investors want to see this. They want to know, if we want to solar, where should we go in that country? We need to know that. If we want wind, where should you go in that country? South Africa has that. If we want small hydro, where do we go? South Africa has got that. And this were done in 2015. If you want the blue economy, which is one of the issues that are coming on energy. Now Namibia is on offshore. South Africa is also exploring offshore. Many other countries can start exploring offshore. So there's also energy potential in the offshore. If we want to dump the solar panels there offshore, we can do that. So these are actually potential that are saying, let's investigate as we move new technologies. Now, I want to leave you with this last slide. This is the slide before thank you. When considering the pathways in addressing climate change and energy transition in East and Southern Africa or on the continent, the bird remains in our hands. I'm literally saying we have the responsibility. We have the power to release the bird alive, or we can release it dead. So the choice is yours. As you go to COP27 as civil society, you have the power to release our ideas dead or to release them alive. So don't go there for podiums. Go there to argue our positions. We need to have, before we leave for Egypt, we need to have an aggregated position. What is the position that we are going to take? We don't want a position that is going to change, getting into this green room and this negotiating room and all of a sudden you become transformed, or you become converted, and you become an enemy of the continent. We are not trying to grow enemies of the continent through these talks. We are trying to grow friends of the continent. And as friends of the continent, I'm hoping that this will open up part of our thinking. I've presented a broad agenda of what happens in negotiations, where we falter year in, year out, and where we need to be. So where we need to be is the 2050 net zero emissions is here to stay. And we want to see how, as an African continent, we're going to address that. Like I said, I did not address this around climate change adaptation, which is our priority as a continent, according to the Africa Union Agenda 2063. I deliberately did not want to mingle a lot of things today. That is a topic for another day. Thank you, and over to you, facilitator.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Namo. That was such a powerful presentation. I kept taking notes ferociously as you were speaking, and I think you brought out very, very pertinent things that we as a continent need to think through. And some of the things very quickly you brought out is that we really need to take charge of this process as a continent. You brought out on the point of equity that there are animals that are bigger and more influential than others. And I think that's very critical in thinking of what really a just transition looks like for Africa. You also brought out the aspect of some of the policy asks that we need to start demanding as civil society, especially as we prepare to go to COP. What are some of the measures that our governments need to think through, and so that we do not ensure that we are victims again of global processes that are usually unequal. And also, as Africa, given that we have those resources that will propel future global growth in terms of looking at critical or green minerals, why don't we have processing plants? These are some of the things, again, you talked about. The issue of stranded assets, very important. Again, what will it mean for countries like Nigeria, Uganda, and Tanzania that are now discovering new sources of energy through oil? And then lastly, I think you ended with a powerful quote that the bird remains in our hands, and we have the power to release the bird dead or alive, because we have the power to decide as a continent. A very important challenge to civil society, that we can't do business as usual. It's not about podiums, that we really need to go with a clear vision as we go to COP, so that we put across the various demands that we need to do so for our continent. So thank you very, very much, Prof. I'll now open it up to the audience. There's a few questions that have already been posed, but maybe as we try to sort out those in the chat, I'll ask anyone who has a question to just raise their hand and put it across to Professor Namo. Okay, wow, there's so many hands already. So without wasting much time, I think I'll ask Dr. Peter Kafumo to please pose his question or comment. Please just keep it 1 minute so that we can have an opportunity to get as many people ask questions. So we'll have we'll have Dr. Kafumo, then we'll have Frederick, and then Don, in that order. And then we'll have another set. So over to you, Dr. Kafumo. Please unmute yourself, or Theo, could you please assist with unmuting Dr. Kafumo? Okay, it appears maybe he might be having a challenge, so maybe we'll get back to him. Hello. Frederick, if you can.
Hello?
Oh, okay, great. Go ahead, please, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I thank you, Professor Goodwell, with your powerful presentation. I have one comment and a question. The comment is that you made it very clear and very nicely presented that African countries, Tanzania, the Congo, South Africa, we have all these minerals which are very important in creating, or at least in developing infrastructure for clean energy. But we still don't have the infrastructure themselves. So I think the point would be to increase our local content strategy, making sure that we localize the technologies and the infrastructure. Many countries are now very busy with the local content strategy, in which they want all the minerals to be used, at least to develop the infrastructure in their countries. So thank you very much for that. And then I think it is an important thing that we will also continue discussing on it. The second is a question. The question is on adaptation and resilience versus mitigation. I'm a geologist, and I understand that the natural causes of climate change are very vivid. They're very, science has shown that these are the main causes actually of climate change. And you can see we have the geometry of the earth. If it changes a bit, you have a climate change. You know, if you have volcanism, you have climate change. The sunspots and so on. There are so many reasons which can change climate. And these climate change are cyclic. They are cyclic in terms of 10,000 years, even in 10 years, until 100,000 years. These are cycles. Science has shown that. And we definitely will have the climate change based on science, on geology. So why is that the world is so much busy with mitigation, leaving out the adaptation and resilience? And why that we don't think of technologies that would make us adapt to any rise in temperature? I know in the past there have been a rise.
Thank you, Doctor. If you could wind up, please, Doc, so that we allow for others. Thank you.
Yeah, in the past we have a rise of temperature over 2 degrees. So we should prepare ourselves for this kind of rise. So we make technologies which really adapts to the rise in temperature and climate change. Asante-san, thank you very much.
Thank you. We can have Frederick now, so that Prof can answer them at once. Frederick and then Don. Frederick, please unmute yourself. Frederick? Okay, maybe Don, you can pose your question and then we'll have Prof respond. Okay, I think maybe they might be having challenges. For now,
it's okay. Don is now able to speak. We have to allow them to the other section, yeah.
Okay, Don, please go ahead.
Thanks, Dr. Namo. That was a very powerful presentation. And indeed, as you clearly stated, the headlines are out. The talk right now in civil society circles is energy transition, critical minerals, and we seem to be following the narrative being set by the global north. In agreement with your presentation, I think it's an opportunity for the first time that what the global north is calling critical minerals as drivers of the energy transition movement should be viewed as strategic minerals for us on the African continent. I appreciate the economic blocks coming up, And what my question to you would be, what message would you give to the heads of states at the East African community, at SADC, and of course the greater AU meeting, if you had an opportunity on how to strategically position ourselves and take charge and lead when it comes to the supply, to controlling the supply chains of the critical, or what I would rather call strategic minerals that are key drivers of energy transition on the continent. We see how when the petroleum industry overtook the whaling industry back in the early 1900s, how OPEC was able in 1960 to come up with a policy that positioned oil-producing countries strategically dictate the prices and the supply of petroleum. Now, looking at Africa, how can we position ourselves to actually control the narrative and supply chains and the jobs that come with these strategic minerals that are now at the forefront of the energy transition movement? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. We will then have Frederick and then allow Prof to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Professor Namo. I think that was a powerful presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question to you would be based on the IPCC report and what you've just highlighted around carbon capture and storage. What does that exactly mean to the energy transition that we talk about? Because from my understanding is that once you have that technology, then essentially it means we probably continue exploring fossil fuel energy sources, and especially coal in that matter. My other last question would be around the carbon emissions from the continents, and the fact that they are very little compared to other regions around the world. As a continent, then does that mean we don't have much to lose when we transition or we leapfrog, to a clean development pathway, essentially, because of the figures that the IPCC report just released recently? Thanks, and over.
Thank you, Chair, Program Facilitator, and the comments. I'm reading the comments. I appreciate your comments and the compliments. It just makes me excited. It means people were following what I was saying. I'll start with the last question. Carbon capture and storage, what does that mean? So basically, carbon capture and storage is saying we are going to capture the carbon or the greenhouse gases that we emit and store them in appropriate geological structures. So literally, we are injecting the carbon back into the appropriate geological structures. So what it means there, it's part of the challenge that we face is, does not necessarily mean that we are promoting emissions, but I'm saying it's one of the solutions that we can look for. So it's just as good as also renewable energy. So in this case, renewable energy, when you transit to renewable energy, you are removing your petrol from the fossil-based energy. So that way you are reducing emissions. Similarly, carbon capture and storage provides that also solution that you might not be able to shift from that, but you can capture it and store it. This is what I call, I usually say, don't tell us to move away from coal. Give me solutions that will make me as an African continue exploiting coal. Why? Because it's the resource that we have. So carbon capture and storage, I would support it because it's a technology then that would allow me as an African to continue utilizing the coal, which is a resource that we have, and in a sustainable manner. So I take that carbon capture and storage as a sustainable solution for mitigation. So I put a tick on that one because it's going to allow me to explore the coal and other fossil fuels that I have more. Then why should Africa worry if we emit so little? So there are two arguments that are coming or that will meet in the course. The first one is like we are not going to remain a stationary continent in terms of growth. So our emissions are going to grow. But the justification really is we have just maybe one country that has got a lot of emissions, which is South Africa, because it's among the 12 top global emitters. And when we remove South Africa from the global emissions map or the emissions map of Africa, we literally emit very little. Unfortunately, the impact of climate change now impact on us more, not because we are emitting little, but because we are vulnerable. By vulnerability, we are saying we have got limited capacity technology-wise, we've got limited capacity in terms of finance. If there is a wildfire in Malawi, for example, or in Ethiopia, for example, it can cause devastation. If there is a wildfire in California, the California government raises helicopters and downs that fire in 2-3 days. So this is now what I mean by vulnerability. We don't have the resources then to react and respond to that. And that question also links to the adaptation question that was being raised. Why don't we then have adaptation technologies and leave the climate change business on its own? We can't have that, because we are going to leave a point where the adaptation technology will still not be able to maintain. If the temperatures go to 60 degrees, for example, we are going to have a huge challenge in terms of having the technology that can enable us to live in that environment, number one. Number two, that there's also an intersection between adaptation and mitigation. So you could actually use energy to cool your mines underground, or to have your HVAC systems. HVAC is heating, cooling, and whatever, for those that are in health and safety, HVAC systems that then also take us to the mitigation space. So we need then to be very careful in terms of how then, to what extent can a technology allow addressing a challenge. In economics, there's what they call the law of diminishing returns. So you can improve a system to a level where it does not give you value anymore. So we can have our adaptation technologies, but they can reach a point where they will not add any more value as an adaptation measure. Then there's also another issue that I want to talk about. You can read on your own. It's called maladaptation. So we can at times we can adapt, and our adaptation measure is simply shifting the problem to the next village. We call that maladaptation. Now, the middle question was, what message will you give to Rex? I decided to leave this one for last. The simple message is, wake up, politicians. Wake up. The time to wake up is now. I think time to visit the Nkrumah's, Kwame Nkrumah's and Nyerere's visions of a united Africa is now. What are we waiting for? Now, this question, that question I always want to raise it. What are we waiting for as heads of states? We have the minerals that the world needs, but we are abusing them. They are maybe for our children, few children, or for our circle of cliques. But I say these national assets can really turn the continent on its head. We don't need even many countries. Maybe we just need DRC, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, because these countries can propel. But the major issue is what we call mineral beneficiation. We have lost the point in terms of mineral beneficiation. African governments think money is made by shifting raw minerals. No, we need to understand the value chain. The entire value chain for every mineral needs to be understood. We need organizations like you, civil society. As you are going to go to COP, somebody, somewhere, must map the value chain of all these green minerals or these strategic minerals until a point when they are being converted to catalytic or whatever they call them in cars, until a point where they are going to the electric battery, until to a point where they are financing a mobile phone. Right now, all over Africa, there's a shortage in terms of supply of S22. This is a Galaxy S22 phone. Where are the minerals coming from? They're coming from Africa. We are not going to allow a situation where we are going to have, I've posted in one of the platforms, the gold reserves and gold deposits. Where are the gold deposits and where are the gold reserves? The gold deposits, they are here in Africa. And where are the deposits? They are in Russia, US, UK, and that situation cannot be allowed now. This is the message I'll send to the Rex and the heads of government. We can't allow the gold rush scenario today. That was then. Time has passed. We can't allow gold rush. We can't allow green minerals rush. So the green minerals rush is happening as we are sitting in our houses. It's happening as we are sitting in our offices. It's happening as we are going to go to COP27. So the message for me for COP27, the COP27 message about net zero by 2050. Net zero by 2050 is not going to happen without green minerals. Where are the green minerals? They are here in Africa. So what are we waiting for? I pose that question again. Over to you, facilitator.
Thank you so much, Prof, for those responses. I'll now give a brief moment to Dr. Rose to respond to her questions in the chat. So Dr. Rose, over to you if you could respond in just under 5 minutes.
Let me start by thanking Prof. That was really brilliant. I enjoyed listening to you. Thank you very much for putting together that great exposition for today. And to thank the participants for the interesting questions they are asking overall. But maybe for me, just to start with the one issue that Professor mentioned in terms of technology, but also how we respond as Africans, to understand our own narrative and not necessarily always follow what is global. It's a bit difficult for me to say this doing the job that I do, but we talk about stranded assets and whether or not Africa should continue to exploit its resources. But in fact, we do have the technologies to mitigate many of these consequences, considering our current emissions are 4%. So the whole issue of carbon capture is something Africa should explore extensively across industries, whether it's construction. If you look at industry alone, Africa's population is growing at one of the fastest rates in the world. We are going to need to construct infrastructure, including housing, which are some of the most polluting sectors next to energy. Carbon capture technologies for the cement industry, just like for coal, exist. In fact, one of the biggest technical assistance projects we have is in South Africa for the cement industry, but also for coal on carbon capture. So to make the point really that one, as Africa, we have to stop talking in generic terms. We talk about mitigation, adaptation, and all that. Let's go down to specifics, especially when it comes to negotiation. So when we go to the COP, let's say in real terms, what are the technologies we need and for what sectors? 2, let's talk in real terms about the research and that is needed for innovative approaches that we need to come, some of which are really indigenous to us and can be done at national level. 3, let's break down the financing. Let's stop talking in generic terms of 100 billion. In reality, that money is very little. It cannot meet our needs as a continent alone. So let's break it down. What does that financing need to cover for the technology, for research and for innovation and all the things we need to do? But also we need data and statistics and science. And this is not limited to scientists alone, because we cannot fully exploit Africa's potential if each country does not have, in very concrete terms, a clear understanding of its renewable energy potential and where it should be done. I have several projects that I'm supporting, for example, geothermal. We have to do feasibility studies first. We have to map countries' energy potentials. And the reason why this is important, it limits investment. So we had, for example, a Norwegian company that wanted to invest in geothermal energy in Uganda. It's part of the East Africa Rift Valley. But Uganda didn't have a law or policy that would allow the private investing companies to secure their investment. This was a $750 million investment. So we had to work with the government first to come up with the policy and then an incentive framework. So these are some of the things we have to speak, in other words, very specifically in terms of what we want. But also we need the right policies and laws, which sometimes limit the resources, because money, as I said, is key, but also the technology. Again, I'll give an example. Because we talked about adaptation, one of the key adaptation sectors is agriculture. A lot of the technologies for climate smart agriculture now are easily accessible. They are cheap. The impediment, you will not believe it in the feasibility studies we've done, is policy and regulatory frameworks. Because we have lots of droughts now in Africa, drip technology that is guided by a combination of satellite and unmanned aerial drones is one of the cheapest, simplest things to do, because it can be linked to a phone application. In many countries in Africa, drone technology is classified as military hardware. You can't import these things, you'd be surprised. So those are very specific areas we need to target. As a civil society, must bring these to our countries. And then the other thing I want to talk about, financing for energy. A lot of it is the way the international community is designed. It is designed to come from the private sector. As I said, that money is there. It depends on the policy and legislative frameworks we have in place. Green hydrogen is going to be the next big frontier after renewable energy. Right now, we're already working with what? 11 countries on green hydrogen. Many countries in Africa haven't anticipated their potential, especially the fossil fuel producing ones. So how do you attract the billions of dollars that are just sitting around, that are being taken to Latin America and Asia? As I said, we should not think about these issues you know, as if it is affecting Africa alone. So how do we attract that? So again, and then just in financing, if you look at the multilateral process, the Global Environment Facility now has a net zero facility where they are willing to fund green hydrogen. Many countries in Africa don't even have a feasibility study. Or the Green Climate Fund alone, I think in the last 2 years, we've worked with 30 countries to develop funding proposals. The biggest impediment for many countries to access, it's $10 billion now in the Green Climate Fund. They just don't have the capacity. They don't have baseline data or statistics. So these are the specifics we need to talk about. Donald, you asked if the transition will be long. Actually, no. You see the thing that technology is allowing us to do when we talk about leapfrog, it's literally exactly that, to leapfrog. We know now, for example, that for energy sector, digital technologies alone will help us to leapfrog literally within a decade to enable everybody to have access to energy. Yeah. So we should, when I say the opportunity is there, it's really there. So, you know, technologies that took 100 years, let's say the steam engine to move from Europe to Africa, it took 100 years. Digital technologies are instantaneous. What is done here in Denmark, where I'm currently located, can happen simultaneously in Uganda, in Kenya, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, and elsewhere. And that is what we need to embrace, but we need to be very intentional about it. Asa, you asked, does the clean energy potential match energy demand? It does, surprisingly. Again, it's about statistics and data. But so to make the point, one, that Africa's renewable energy potential has been scientifically established across the board. And now with the proliferation of satellite data, we know exactly where the hotspots for renewable energy are. So whether it's wind or solar, and if you combine that with geothermal and green hydrogen, now it's just Africa understanding what the appropriate mix is. It's not one or the other. We need a very good mix of these technologies. Two, the other important element, of course, is to account for population growth and urbanization. Africa has a high population growth and it's urbanizing. So to have a continued plan of growth in terms of potential, it's limitless. If you add what we call the North Africa and Middle East, in terms of renewable energy, we can literally power not just Africa, but the entire world. And that is literally based on scientific facts. So again, as I said, I am a bit more optimistic, but I think that is what we need to focus on. And Donald, just one other question you asked on adaptation. Of course, we do understand that Africa's priority is adaptation. I think many years ago, I don't know, 2011 or 2012, 2013, 14, when we're developing Agenda 2063, actually, I was advisor to the chairperson of the African Union, and Africa is very clear on its priorities. That's a good thing. How we articulate them is another thing, with a degree of specificity. We have to stop speaking in generalities. We have to go granular. That's how you bring about change. That's how you bring technologies and finances, which go together. And for the UN, we know, I sit in UNEP now. UNEP also hosts the IPCC, so we generate the IPCC. It hosts the technology framework, which I head. UNEP also produces the emissions gap report and the adaptation gap report. That's why I said we now know that you cannot have one without the other. You cannot address adaptation and resilience without cutting greenhouse gas emissions, which is largely a problem generated from the countries in the north, especially the G20. Doesn't matter how much we adapt, as long as they continue to emit, the problem persists. So the two have to go hand in hand. And while we are at 4% and we are struggling to adapt and create resilience in our communities, they must have deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. And that is why for Africa, we say the priority is adaptation. The technologies and resources we need for that adaptation must not have a limit, even if they come with a degree of emission. So I think potentially for Africa, in terms of agriculture, I said for production, we also have the biggest landmass for agricultural production. It's not utilized. We have the technologies, energy. And that's why it's a cyclical problem. It's a loop. We cannot fully realize our potential for agriculture without actually energy. Energy for farm production across the value chain, energy for storage. You know, there's a lot of food waste in Africa and food loss at harvest. You know, because we don't have enough storage and enough processing ability. So these things are linked. That's why energy is critically important for every sector. Someone talked about water. That's a whole nother conversation. But I just thought I could just talk a little bit about some of these things. And thank you once again for this very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. I think you've attempted to touch on all the comments and questions that were raised for you in the chat. I think we can continue to engage you online via email if there are further questions. Thank you. I'll now allow Cynthia, who raised the question in the chat. Cynthia, if you could like to just ask your questions verbally, that would be great. And then after Cynthia, we can have Siraji, whose hand is up. And then I also note that Peter had his questions in the chat. So if you'd like to read them out, that would be great. This, I think, will be our last round of questions. So Prof, if you could also just look into the chat and respond to whatever comments and questions have been raised after, so that you can give us one comprehensive response, and then we will have Nelly from Publish What You Pay. So we'll have Cynthia, Siraji, and then Peter. So Cynthia, please, if you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you. This is Cynthia from Nigeria. I want to thank Prof for that wonderful lecture. It was actually a lecture that he gave on the issues of climate change and renewable transition. I asked a question and I said, what are the possibilities to achieve the net zero emission in a corrupt country? And how come that we Africans that have the natural resources, yet we suffer poverty and our voices seems not heard, and we are not even given the environmental rights? So how do we go about that in a corrupt government? Prof.
Thank you, Cynthia. Siraji, if you could just also ask your question.
Thank you, and thanks to our great presenters for wonderful delivery, and specifically to Dr. Rose. I want to really examine the issue of energy financing, because with the climate financing and the discussions at the different COPs, it has been mainly emphasizing adaptation, mitigation, and related stuff. There are 100 billion, the famous 100 billion we are talking about. But the discussion on financing energy active is something that I'm not feeling, because it looks like without energy access, especially like in developing countries, then the transition we are talking about is a hoax, because we virtually have nowhere we are transiting from, and we have nowhere we are transiting to. So what are the mechanisms that can be put in place to ensure that the energy poverty in sub-Saharan Africa is reduced by having more financing mechanisms for energy that will now combine with the climate financing, so that we are able to deal with the problem holistically? Because as it is now, is on one side. And I want to know whether there are efforts in that line with the Africa Union, with our regional platform, SADC, something like that, because it is something that we feel it is not well tackled.
Thank you. Siraji. And then the last question, Peter. Peter, if you could just speak to some of the issues you raised in your questions very quickly in a minute. Peter, I'm not sure if he's still online. Okay. For now, we can allow Prof to respond. I'm sure he saw them in the chat. So Prof, over to you.
Thank you, facilitator. I'll maybe, after answering, I'll try then to quickly just go to the chat, because there were also a lot of other issues that were coming on the other main chat, the quick QA question and answer platform. So in terms of why is that we have resources and yet we suffer poverty, it's an old age question. And the reason why we are having this, for me, it's a structural defect in terms of how our economies are set up, but in terms of leadership as well. I think there's one observation I've made, which differs greatly between the, I'm trying to unmute, I'm trying to put, yeah, okay. I was trying to put my video on, yeah, so I think one of note observes, like, we have got a problem in terms of continuity. So the government agenda for African countries is aligned to the political agenda, which is a problem. So when you go to the countries like US, Canada, UK, Australia, the government agenda is stationed, it's permanent. So if, for example, the Blair government was talking about energy transition by 2050, then you discover the current president, maybe John Major's government or whoever comes after that, the government agenda is stationary. If it is the US, whether it's Obama, it's Trump, or it's Biden, the government agenda is stationary. So that has given these countries a platform to have a continuous development agenda. Now, when it comes to Africa, if it is Uhuru Kenyatta's government, or it might be Kibaki's government, or it might be Wamtarika's government and Joyce Banda's government, then you discover it's linked or aligned to the new president and what the new party agenda is all about. So we really need to seriously think about linking government agenda, or leaving a government agenda as a permanent agenda. Now we are busy talking about energy transitions and net zero by 2050. You can imagine how many African governments we are going to have in this particular time, since from 2022 to 2050. In other countries, we would have, if you divide that by 5 years, you are going to have as many presidents as you can have. And if these presidents are going to bring new political agendas, then it's going to be problematic. We have witnessed it here in South Africa, where the President Mbeki's agenda, basically the African Renaissance agenda, somehow fell off the table, and it had consequences on how the development in South Africa was shaped. So that is one of the major reasons why we are having this. The other reason, basically, we've remained a consumer continent. Resources we have not spoken a lot around beneficiation in whatever sector, which this is an overdue debate. So we can't continue exporting cotton and also like what Ethiopia does in exploited factory workers earning $50 a month in Ethiopia. I visited some of those industries. We can't have such a situation. So we're saying, when is Ethiopia starting to beneficiate its cotton and improve its economy? So these are the questions that we need to continue asking. Then in terms of why is discussing financing, energy financing not coming up vividly in the COPs? For me, the direct answer is it's by design. Remember, business has found favor in terms of getting into the renewable energy space or remaining into the energy space. So there is a lot of money. Actually, I even answered on the platform, popular platform. There is a business case for investing in renewable energy. So all these companies have seen that money is being made. Actually, for South Africa, there's actually been exploitation, because the first contracts for independent power producers were so high. Kilowatt hour of energy was costing us so much. It's only now where the cost has gone down, but the companies that have gone ahead of time, they've made a killing in terms of their bottom line in that space. Then there was another one that was saying, I think for me, the irony is that some of these countries in the West are busy divesting from fossil fuels at home, then investing in Africa or elsewhere. This is true. You look at a company like Glencore. I think Glencore is it could be from Switzerland. I think that's where their head office is. This is a huge global company. They've gone ahead and bought new mines, coal mines actually, in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, or one of those Latin American countries. And that trajectory is moving on. And yet what is being said there in Europe, Switzerland, they're talking about net zero by 2050. And some of their major companies are talking about a different story altogether. So they say, let's invest now, exploit as quickly as we can the coal, then move out when 2050 comes. So these are some of the issues that are really taking place in our backyard. Now, let me just also try to, as I conclude now, I think it's my last response. I'm trying to move into some of the questions that are there. At my viewpoint, there are more community radios than blah, blah. I think I will not attempt to go and read and answer some of these questions, but I think there's one that says, Prof, the major culprit of climate change is water. Is your omission of SDG 6 linking the relevant SDGs intentional? No, it's not intentional. What I said there, if you're listening and if you're not understood there, in SDGs, it's interesting. You can lift any SDG and all the other SDGs will hang on that particular SDG. So I can lift the SDG on water and sanitation, SDG 6, then you discover then a lot of issues that will come. But remember I said, I am not concentrating on the adaptation issue. So once you talk water and sanitation, it brings me completely into the compartment of climate adaptation and resilience. So this is why I did not lift that. I lifted the SDGs that has something to do with climate change and energy transition, which is SDG 7, SDG 9, and SDG 9, by the way, it's for infrastructure, and SDG 13, and also 12. I could actually have included SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production as well, but I did not do that. What would be the simple message for that one, for an African smallholder villager on the intersectional complexity of climate change and energy transition this evening? I think for the small scale farmers, what is going to happen, what is going to affect them is having this low carbon production in the farming sector. In South Africa, you discover a lot of wine farms have changed to renewable energy because our energy, which is Eskom powered energy, Eskom is a state utility here, has got an inherent high carbon content. So it discovers some of the countries were despising produce that have got high carbon content. There's also a movement, I think, in East Africa towards organic agriculture or organic farming. Actually, there's a global movement towards organic farming. So
sorry, Prof.
Yes.
Sorry, if you could just wind up in a minute. We are 2 minutes away from the top of the hour, so please, thank you.
So I think I'll wind up with that message for the small farmers to say we should actually be on the lookout in terms of what energy transitions will mean for a small farmer. So you cannot continue producing with your fossil fuels, yet there's been movement in powering that sector. I thank you, facilitator, and I also thank you, participants. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think you've seen from the active engagement that we've really appreciated your presentation and the delivery of your submission. And so we'll definitely be calling on you again. A quick thank you to our participants. And before you drop off, please, I'll hand over to Nelly, who has some important announcements to make on the upcoming process with this series, as well as the alternative line endeavor. Nelly, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukupa. Thank you to everybody.
Sorry, Nelly, one more thing. Sorry, Nelly, one more thing. I wrote in the chat there to say there was a point that was raised by an organization for minerals exporting countries. I said, organizers, this is your homework. That thing needs to come alive. Thank you, over.
Thank you, Professor Goodwell. I won't take up a lot of your time. I know we've had a lot of discussions and we really appreciate your time, Dr. Rose as well. And I think you've exceeded our expectations because I know when we met early this week, we had quite a number of expectations. You've set the pace. We have another webinar tomorrow, same time as today, 11 a.m. East African time. So I think we've sent the link in the chat, and tomorrow we'll be digging deeper into these issues, looking at oil, gas, and coal, and hopefully that we'll have a very good, active discussions tomorrow. But we'll also have a number of webinars and sessions around these same issues about alternative mining in Indaba in May next month. And I think we'll send a link when we join tomorrow for the webinar. So please look out for the link. Thank you very much. We've had very good deliberations, and I think one question that hasn't been answered today is Africa ready for the transition? So thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
If you registered for the webinar, you should be able to receive a recording after here. So I think you'll all be able to get it. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Prof.